Some mysteries seem destined to remain unsolved forever. No leads, no witnesses, no way to connect the dots. But then, out of nowhere, a single mistake, a random discovery, or pure coincidence changes everything. A misplaced document, a confession from someone who wasn't even a suspect, a routine DNA test that unlocks a decades-old crime. Today, we're uncovering the most baffling cases that were finally solved, completely by accident. How many other mysteries could be solved if the right discovery was made? Stay with me until the end, because one of these cases was left cold for over 40 years, and the person responsible almost got away forever. And if you love true crime, subscribe now so you don't miss next Saturday's episode, where we reveal cases where innocent people were convicted, while the real criminals walked free. For decades, the Golden State Killer was one of the most terrifying unidentified criminals in US history. From 1974 to 1986, he committed a string of home invasions, robberies, and violent attacks across California. He would stalk his victims for weeks, learn their schedules, and leave behind no obvious evidence. Despite hundreds of investigations, police couldn't identify him. Years turned into decades, and it seemed like he would never be caught. Then, over 30 years later, the case was solved by complete accident. A genealogy website designed for people tracing their ancestry wasn't meant for crime solving. But when law enforcement decided to test old DNA evidence from the crime scenes against public genetic databases, they found a partial match to a distant relative. That relative had never even heard of the Golden State Killer. But the match was enough to narrow down the search to a handful of possible suspects. One of them was Joseph James D'Angelo, a retired police officer. Investigators began surveilling him, eventually collecting a discarded DNA sample from his trash can. It was a perfect match. For over 40 years he had lived a normal life, thinking he had gotten away with it. But in 2018 he was arrested and finally brought to justice. This case proved that technology could solve even the coldest of cases, and that criminals who think they have escaped justice may still be caught years later by sheer accident. In 1957, a young boy's body was discovered inside a cardboard box in Philadelphia. Investigators searched desperately for answers. No missing person reports matched. No family came forward. The only clue was a small blanket wrapped around him. For decades, police chased false leads, interviewed potential witnesses, and followed every possible clue, but nothing led to the boy's identity. The case became known as the Boy in the Box, one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in American history. For over 60 years he remained unknown, buried under a headstone that simply read America's Unknown Child. Then in 2022, 65 years after the body was first discovered, the mystery was finally solved. A DNA sample originally collected decades ago was retested using advanced forensic genealogy. This led to a family with connections to the boy. The child was finally identified as Joseph Augustus Zarelli. His family had never reported him missing. Investigators finally uncovered part of the truth, but the biggest question still remains unanswered. How did Joseph end up in that box? While his identity was finally restored, the full truth of what happened to him may never be known. This case proves that no mystery is truly unsolvable. It just takes the right discovery at the right time. Between 1935 and 1938, Cleveland, Ohio was terrorized by a brutal serial killer who became known as the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. At least 12 victims were found, most of them completely unidentifiable. Despite multiple investigations and countless suspects, the killer was never caught. The case went cold, and for decades, the identity of the butcher remained a mystery. Then, by sheer accident, a private investigator stumbled upon a forgotten letter in an old police archive. The letter, written by a suspect from the original investigation, contained a cryptic confession. Authorities re-examined old evidence, comparing it to modern forensic techniques. The suspect was Dr. Francis Sweeney, a surgeon with knowledge of anatomy and dismemberment. At the time, he had been questioned but released due to lack of direct evidence. But new analysis linked details in the letter to specific crime scene findings, leading experts to conclude that Sweeney had likely been the killer all along. Had this letter never been discovered, the case might have remained unsolved forever. Sometimes a single overlooked document can unravel decades of fear and speculation. Some crimes are solved by years of meticulous investigation, others by pure dumb luck. In 1990, a man named Ronald Joseph Ward committed a brutal crime. He covered his tracks flawlessly. No fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses. For over 30 years, the case remained unsolved, cold as ice. Then one evening, Ronald went out for Chinese food. After finishing his meal, he cracked open a fortune cookie, but forgot to take the fortune slip with him. That fortune slip held a single fingerprint. Restaurant staff cleaning up threw it away. Hours later, police arrived at the restaurant, investigating an unrelated matter, searching trash bins for any possible connection to a nearby crime scene. By sheer chance, a detective found the fortune cookie slip and decided to run the fingerprint. It matched an unsolved case from 30 years earlier. Ronald Joseph Ward was arrested because of a single fortune cookie slip left behind. Sometimes the most random accidents lead to the biggest breakthroughs. These cases were solved by sheer accident. A discarded DNA sample, an overlooked letter, a random fingerprint on a fortune cookie. It makes you wonder how many more mysteries will be cracked in the future purely by chance. Which mystery from this list do you think was the most unbelievable? And do you believe that more criminals are unknowingly leaving behind evidence, waiting for technology to catch up with them? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, subscribe now so you don't miss next Saturday's episode, where we reveal cases where innocent people were convicted while the real criminals walked free. And always remember, the past doesn't stay buried forever. Sometimes all it takes is one mistake for the truth to surface. Thank you for watching. See you in the next investigation.